Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Radical Candor Podcast. I'm Kim Scott.
I'm Jason Rosoff.
And I'm Amy Sandler. And today we have two very special guests, Ezra Rose and Davis Carter. Ezra and Davis were integral in the production of the Radical Candor Sessions by Masterclass. Ezra is a filmmaker living on Lenape land, otherwise known as New York City. They often focus on stories of queer and trans community, experiences of disability, and historically suppressed voices. Between 2018 and 23, Ezra worked with Masterclass as a coordinator, associate producer, creative producer, director, and interviewer, proudly contributing to classes with people like Roxane Gay, Robin Roberts, Mother Joffrey, and of course, the Radical Candor team. While at Masterclass, Ezra served as co-chair of the LGBTQIA+ employee resource group, where they were able to use their organizational skills, education in LGBTQIA+ issues, and their personal experience as a proud queer and trans person in the world to serve their community. They're currently working on a film about the rich history of trans community newsletters. Welcome, Ezra.
Very cool.
Hi.
And Davis is a storyteller based in San Francisco. Davis is currently the head of content at the psychedelic therapy company Mind Bloom. Prior to that, he was a director of content at Masterclass, where he worked for over 6 years. And at Masterclass, Davis oversaw more than 20 projects, including classes with former President Bill Clinton, Metallica, Amy Tan, and of course, our very own Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff. That is quite a list of company to be kept with.
I'm
so curious. Yeah, tell me more about Metallica. In a past life, Davis worked in film and television and contributed to FX's Emmy Award-winning Fargo, Hulu's Emmy Award-winning The Handmaid's Tale, and the History Channel's Vikings. Welcome, Davis. Welcome, Ezra. Over to you.
We're thrilled to have you here.
Yep, thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited.
We had so much fun working on this, and we miss you. So it's good to be back together again.
Couldn't agree more.
So I have a question. Were either one of you all familiar with Radical Candor before we started working together? And did you have any conception or misconception about what it was?
I'll let Davis take this one because I know Davis's answer is much better than mine, which is I wasn't.
Davis.
Well, yes. I mean, I was familiar with the Radical Candor approach and philosophy. It was actually something that our company made us aware of. I think it was a few years before we created our project together, but it was something that came up in kind of our company philosophy as something that we would adhere to and live as a value within the company, and was something that we brought into our performance reviews and things like that. We were constantly reminded of the optimal ways to give feedback, including context. I think they maybe even kind of adjusted the language slightly, but it was essentially driving towards the same thing. And it was something that I think the company did a good job of trying to live. I think, speaking candidly, it was something that wasn't always quite there, depending on who you were collaborating with. But I know it was something that we definitely strove to bring to even like a smaller team, if it wasn't something that was kind of going all the way up the ladder. So,
do you think that there was sort of a tendency towards ruinous sympathy, towards obnoxious aggression, towards manipulative insincerity, or all three?
That is a good question. I think it kind of, at least for me, depended on who I was interacting with.
Yeah.
And there were times where I think, for example, we would maybe even on like a shoot or something like that, we would be doing one thing and then we would hear later on that it had maybe ruffled some feathers somewhere, as opposed from getting it from that person, getting it from even my boss. And I was like, ooh, man, I didn't even know that I did that. I wish I could have heard it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
And so, really kind of varied from person to person. And I think, I don't want to speak ill of the team at Masterclass. I think a lot of people had the best, they were taking like active steps in what they thought was radical candor. And I think maybe on occasion would miss the mark.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say be radically candid, really hard to do it. And one of the things, and Ezra, I want to hear your thoughts as well, but Davis, as long as we're talking about you and your thoughts with radical candor, like I'm going to solicit some feedback. Because one of the things that I noticed that I did as we were working together is that we talk a big game about focus on the good stuff and talk, give more praise and criticism. But I felt like I was always sort of saying what needed to be changed, as opposed to I felt like I didn't give enough praise. So sometimes maybe I felt a little obnoxiously aggressive as we were working together. I don't know what was, and be radically candid. Like, you can tell, I can take it.
I don't think that I felt that. I can't speak for Ezra, but I don't think that I felt that there was any obnoxious aggression. I think sometimes it may have even just kind of been a symptom of the limitations in our time, because we would have those interactions where we would set a call, we would be there to discuss some things. And I think the natural tendency is to look at the to-do list and check things off, saying we talk about this, and more often than not, it's a thing we need to navigate together. So it's, this thing came up and we need your approval on our approach to it. Or you advocated for this one thing, and unfortunately we can't do that. And so I think it may have felt as though that was kind of the primary lens through which things were being delivered, but it wasn't ever anything that I felt in a negative way. I kind of felt like we were just setting them up and knocking them down. And I will compliment you on your that you did give us praise, I think, at opportune moments. And I think, to be honest, if it was at every single call, it almost starts to become a little bit disingenuous, or feel disingenuous. If everybody's like, great job each time, you're like, am I actually doing a great job, or are they just saying that? So, I mean, that was my kind of my view on everything. But I'd love to hear if Ezra had anything that they thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Kim, because it's the way the kind of process functions is that we are constantly seeking, we need your kind of guidance, because we're making something to distill, what you've created and what the Radical Candor team has created. And so in those moments, we have these condensed times, or, these moments going back and forth in a Google Doc. So what we really need is, like, to facilitate the process to move along is, just what's not working as much as possible. And so we're both kind of trained, all of us are trained to be able to handle that and a very kind of like take that in our stride, because our goal is to make the best thing that like takes what you've been doing and make that educational. And so all of that information was always so valuable. Like it was always, for me, I was like, oh, that's information. It's great information. It's great information. It's never like, oh, my work is terrible. It was always so useful. So
your work is wonderful.
Yeah. And on that topic, I wanted to, for folks who are listening to the podcast that might not be familiar with Masterclass, I want to give, we've sort of described it before, but since you all were so integral in creating it, well, what's the elevator pitch for what we created together on Masterclass?
You're gonna have me. I'm such a stumbly talker, so it's gonna be a terrible elevator pitch.
It's good.
You'll get what you get.
We got 100 floors.
Okay. So we took what Kim and the Radical Candor team has created, and we took the essence of that and leveraged the tools and formats that we have, and created a course that students can take to move through and practice Radical Candor using video and engaging, there's PDFs, workbook stuff that can help students kind of get it practically. Because I know for me, if I read a book, I'm like, this is such great ideas, yeah. And then I'm sort of stumbling around in the world trying to implement that stuff. And it can feel really messy and you don't have the guidance. And so using the format that we had, it was a really exciting thing to take this thing that you've made and then, use the tools that we have at our disposal to make something for the students. Does that help?
Yes.
It does. Okay, cool. It does.
That's a great description.
Davis, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's dead on. And I think for me, when creating something, when creating a masterclass that's potentially based on existing information, what we're always trying to do, or what I'm trying to bring to it, is a way of distilling it down into something that's fitting of our format, just because the experience of reading a book versus watching something A lot of the times people are willing to dedicate a little more time to a book than they are engaging with video content. And so it's distilling it down to its core essence while also honoring the information that and the philosophies that underpin it. And I think, Ezra had mentioned it, but also leveraging our format to do things that might not be able to be done in the written medium. I can't speak for you, Kim, but I imagine as you were writing the book, at times you're like, I really wish I could do this thing, but I can't because it's just words on a page.
Yeah.
And so, doing what we can to kind of bring in some of those elements, whether it be demonstrations or, there were the graphic elements that would kind of move with the conversation to indicate how things were flowing, because the nature of communication is fluid. And so there was little elements that I think that we had in our format that we hope that we could bring to the existing content.
Yeah. Also, shout out to the graphics team who did amazing work on the class. I mean, there's like so many people who also worked on the class. So yeah.
Yes, a true team effort, and I feel as though the graphics team got the most of Kim's nitpicking. And I say with love.
It's true. I care deeply about the graphics.
And it really helped the course be better.
I'm not very visual. So it's like, I know something's wrong, but I don't know quite what it is.
Well, and that's one of those other things too, I think, that actually just really quickly is one of the other things that we're trying to do is embody the individual and their vibe, for lack of a better word, because there are all these visual elements of video content. And so I think, Ezra was leading the charge of trying to capture your personality in even the color palette of the graphics that were used, to the nature of the archival footage that we employed, and then also the music. It's all one big thing. And I think we were trying to capture you and your personality, and also you, Jason, as much as we possibly could, in addition to just the core concepts.
What I will say is my elevator pitch is we took the sort of core ideas of the book in Radical Candor, and in two or three ways breathed life into them. One way was Kim and me, to some extent, telling stories or sharing our perspective about what radical candor is, what some of the obstacles are to employing it, and what you can do about that. And then you all added both the graphic element and the demonstrations, which sound abstract, but in this case were acted by two incredibly talented performers. And they really breathed life into situations that we might find ourselves in, and gave students something to respond to that had real emotion in it, which is something that is critical for understanding what radical candor practice actually looks like in the real world. I think without any of those three, and then when you add on top of that the sort of like the visual language that you created, I loved. People who take the masterclass will notice there are these sort of like geometric shapes that interact with each other in a very playful way. That was really cool, as well as the sort of the subtle audio language that was created, the soundscape, the music, and how all that stuff worked together. I really love the way that it all came out, and I feel like it did a great service to Radical Candor, and I'm hoping that it did a service to the subscribers of Masterclass and gave them an opportunity to see some content that, even as you said, it already exists in the world, but this is just a new way of interacting with it. So I'm incredibly grateful to both of you and to the huge team of people that worked on it. I remember getting on set the first day that we were recording and being like, there's like 100 people here.
Yeah, how many people were there? It was incredible.
The thing is, our crew, is enormous. And then, so that you see, like, sort of, I don't know, maybe there were 40 to 50 people there, Davis, that day. And then, I'm like, I want to run through all of the names of the people who worked on the finishing of the class, like, but there are many names and it would take up the whole thing. So it's like, I don't know. I'm like, oh no. But it's a really, really huge effort of people. If you think about the graphics team, there's like at least 4 or 5 people who are doing that. And then there's the editors and it's remarkable.
Yeah, I think if you like zooming all the way out, I think in terms of the amount of people at Masterclass that would have touched this project, there's the crew of probably 30 or 40 who are usually, they're largely contractors. So the set designer, the caterers, the gaffers, all those people. And then there's our internal kind of producing crew, which would be me and Ezra and also our associate producer. And so that's a 3-person crew. And then with the graphics, at least 4 or 5 people, even with the insights. So when we have our team that helps us beta test the concept or the content before it is actually launched, and we figure out what's working and what's not working, there's 2 or 3 people on our insights team. The edit team, the people who are actually in the bays editing it with Ezra, is 4 people. And then we also have our partners in marketing and PR who help launch the project and get it out into the world. I think, so all told, it's around 50 or 60 people, I think, that would have touched this and helped make it what it is, in addition to you, of course.
And there were some writers as well who helped us with the, kind of putting together the script, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you all were, we also threw sort of, I don't think you've done this in other masterclasses, but having Lily and Roberto there to act out some of the stuff I was very grateful to you all for being willing to do that, because I think it added a lot, being able to sort of watch Radical Candor go right, and also maybe watch a couple of Radical Candor train wrecks and how to recover from them.
Yeah. And that was something, that as Ezra and I were talking, just catching up a little bit before this, that we were saying we were so appreciative of your advocacy for also, including them, but also making sure that they were present and it throughout the entire project, and that it wasn't just the Kim Scott show, because, the nature of interpersonal relationships is such that it's not a one-sided thing. And so, we really appreciated that you just advocated for that throughout the process.
Yeah, it was really fun, and I think it makes the ideas come to life if it's not just the Kim Scott show.
And I don't want to make this too wonky, but I'm really curious. How did you keep it together? How did you keep the train from constantly going off of the tracks? 60 people is a lot of people to coordinate. And then you have the intense coordination of the few days that we're actually on set together and making sure that you actually get everything that you need. I think this is a thing that many people in our audience often struggle with, is how do you think about these things in a way that doesn't drive you completely batty?
Ezra, I'd love to hear your response on it.
It's not my first rodeo.
Yeah.
I've done a few of these, as you know. Over that time, of working in this format, I have come to really deeply believe that everyone is doing their best, and everyone they're trying and they're bringing what they can to this process. And so that helps me keep any kind of feelings about my own kind of frustrations or whatever I ever might have really at bay, because I'm I want to facilitate everyone to do their best work and to feel good being here. And I also want everyone to be able to go home and make dinner with their family and not be God, that was a bad day. I can't control all of that, but it's nice if you can make it a positive experience. And so I don't ever conceive of it as being a control thing. I'm not I've got these 60 people to keep, to manage. And it's always how do we facilitate the best time we can with 60 people? And then I'm also just very organized. So that helps. Yeah.
This is this is the asterisk in the manual that you read, which is have a decade's worth of experience as a plumber and then install the drain underneath your sink.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think, and on my end too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, I wanted to acknowledge that, that I think the intention there is also incredibly powerful. That we had another podcast conversation recently where the guest talked about intention setting, and I think that idea of hey, my goal going into to work today is to bring the best out of people in the best way that I can, and to do that in a way that honors that they're full human beings and they have families and lives outside of this place. I just wanted to acknowledge that how rare that is, because as a person who's not terribly organized, I think my panic would cause me to want to control things, and would probably lead me to not getting the best out of everybody in that process.
Yeah, and that touches on a thing that came to mind as I was hearing Ezra talk through their experience and all the amazing work that they did to keep, the trains on schedule. One of the things that I came to it with, and I think for those who are listening, the nature of our relationship is such that Ezra is the producer, and they are deeply, deeply embedded in the subject matter and they're executing all the creative decisions, whether that's in pre-production, post-production, they're, executing. And for me as a director of content, I'm overseeing and providing support and guidance throughout that process as much as I can. And a lot of what I feel my role is in that situation is empowering them to do their best work and identifying the things that they don't need to spend their time on, or that's going to take them away from the most important parts, and handling as much of that as I possibly can so they can focus on being a creative genius like they are. So for me, I was trying to constantly kind of look down the road, see how things might go wrong, and try and anticipate those, and then formulate a plan in advance that would allow me to address those. So then that way, if and when it happened, I could just execute and then bring Ezra in if I needed to. But otherwise, really just letting them focus on what was most important to the overall success of the project.
Did you all have any radical moments between the two of you as we were making this? I'm gonna keep putting you on the spot. And they could be positive moments. They could be great praise. Radical Candor's not all about criticism.
Davis and I checked in, like he said, we checked in before this because we were like, oh, that's going to be a question. Like it's like even before any of this, I was like, I knew that this was going to be a question. So we had also checked in like after the class was released. We kind of talked about it and debriefed it. And I've said the same thing every time. I'm like, Davis came into this so open and willing to receive feedback that the kind of the immediacy of it was so it was just like in the moment all the time, because he was always like, please tell me, that I never felt that it was going to be difficult to do, that I wouldn't be able to share things that weren't working. And he responded so well and course corrected a lot. And then I don't know for you, Davis, how you felt in terms of giving me feedback, but it just, I don't know, that model, I remember walking in, because Davis and I hadn't like been in the same room until we were on set. And I remember we had, it was before you came to set, and we were sitting in a conference room, and we had to like make some edits and, change some things because we were on set, and we were like, okay, this is how everything's functioning. We have to make these changes. We have a couple of hours. We kind of have to do this in a way where we're going to be very like, it's going to be feedbacky, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I just remember feeling so comfortable and confident that we could get this done together because it was so easy to just go right into that. I will praise Davis all day about that.
It did have a happy feel on set. I mean, it was fun. It was really fun.
Well, then we try, so that we're glad that it felt that way. But yeah, I think for me, there was like a couple standout moments in it. I was reminded of one as Ezra was talking earlier, which is that I found myself constantly praising their empathy, just for the way that everything was operating, particularly in the edit. The edit can be kind of an intense time because the timelines are pretty much set. And so if things take longer to navigate than you anticipate, it's not like you get more time. You just have less time to do the rest of that stuff in. And that's not only like an impact on the individual producer, but it's also an impact on their edit team who has to be in the edit bay with them. And I was just constantly seeing how empathic Ezra was in all of their interactions. And that was a thing that I was constantly praising them about. So yeah, I found that more often than not, the things that we were sharing with each other that were constructive, there was a great atmosphere of we were already expecting it. And so it really was, there's this thing that sometimes, if you did it, it would be different and that would be amazing. We just had a great foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It came across. Ezra, I have a question for you. Sorry, Jason, if I'm interrupting, but this is a burning question. Very rarely do you find, maybe this is just a bias, so feel free to tell me this is incorrect, but it's my experience or maybe my bias that very rarely do great organization and enormous empathy go hand in hand. And they do, but they do with you, and so what's the trick? Like, and maybe this is just because I'm disorganized, but like when I'm trying to be super organized, I get really mean when people, I fall into the obnoxious aggression quadrant. So how do you pull that combo off, empathy and organization? And am I just being unfair to organization?
No, I think that's a really, really interesting question. Something I think about in therapy a lot. It's you know what it is? It's like I'm not like naturally organized, but I think that the empathy thing is first, that I actually have empathy for myself. And I know that it would make things easier for myself if things were organized, and like it's easier for other people if I organize that stuff. And so it's the organization thing is it's like all just skill based. Like I've just worked on it really, really hard over the years. Because you can ask my parents. I don't think I was like that as a kid. It's definitely something that I've developed as a means to facilitate more ease for myself and for other people.
And also to ending, like to getting home for dinner,
Yes, it's so important to me that people can get home for dinner.
Yeah.
I love that.
Kim, I wonder if it has to do with the fact that for you and I to organize something as complex as this project, it would drain us of like our energetic reserves because it's not something that we're naturally drawn to. And so we become very precious about the organization thing that we did, as opposed to realizing what Ezra just so skillfully described, which is that organization exists in service of the human beings that it's helping to organize. Like the only purpose is to make it easier for people to do the things that have been organized. And if you bring that as if that becomes an exercise in stress, like you're actually making it hard, it's working across purposes. Like, anyway, so maybe it's not organization in general. Maybe it's like people who have a hard time organizing things make organization stressful, as opposed to an empathic or empathetic exercise.
Yes. entirely possible.
Well, I think too, I definitely too, I understand your point though too, because I find when you had asked the question, I was like, how do I try and demonstrate empathy in my working relationships? And so much of it is written or verbal acknowledgement of the circumstances. That's a lot of what empathy is. It's recognizing where somebody else might be in a situation, and sometimes that takes time. If it's like, this needs to happen by tomorrow, and I know we weren't planning on it, and I imagine this is probably a little bit tricky for you, and I acknowledge that, and I apologize. Do you think what would need to be true for us to make X, Y, or Z possible? But it's true that I think that empathy takes time. It takes time to write that extra thing and not just say this needs to be done by tomorrow. And that sometimes can fall by the wayside, particularly in high pressure or high pressure situations. So it's like it's an active thing that I can't always live up to that, but it is something that I do remind myself of, at least in those situations. I'm like, this is an important element. That's the one that I might skip given the time constraints, but I'm gonna give it the time and attention that it deserves.
Yeah, and often when you do take that extra beat to acknowledge, you actually save yourself time, because then you don't have to spend a bunch of time like with the person angry at you.
100%. Yeah.
Speaking of I want to stay in the moment for a moment and talk about moments. On big projects, there's often these moments of great sort of angst and then great excitement. Because on our end, it was pretty much there was like some angstiness in the run up to the actual day to like, did we get the content right? And are we going to get the things right? But then when we got there, it was like pretty much all fun. Like being on set with you all, like that process was great. And especially as we started to see the stuff come out of edit, like we remained confident that things were moving in the right direction. But I imagine that cycle might have been different for you all. So I'm kind of curious, like what was your sort of high moment on the project and low moment on the project?
I think for high moments, I would say that there was one that was collective. And I think for me, one of the best parts of this job is when you're in a collaboration that's just humming along. And I think that was something that, that Ezra had mentioned earlier, but it just makes the whole thing easy. And so you can look back on it and essentially be like, that was all pretty great. And so, that is a huge high moment to be able to reflect on something and have that takeaway. And so like that was one thing that I really, really valued about this project in collaborating with Ezra, but also working with you. It was something that I looked back and I was just like, yeah, that was great, and it was pretty easy. And so that's a huge high moment. You can look back on something and be like, man, I'm glad it's out, but that was tough. And so that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case here. And then there were other like almost micro high moments, which is one of the most gratifying parts of the creative process for me at Masterclass, is when you're trying to solve a problem, and a problem can be like the story isn't working, or it's not working quite as well as it could, and you're kind of doing some tinkering. You almost feel like a mad scientist where you're like, if we move this part, maybe this idea would land better. And there was something that we were kind of wrestling with in the edit, and it just had to do with the sequencing of some of our demonstrations. And it was something that Ezra and I went back and forth on quite a bit. And we found ultimately that with the demonstrations in which we were trying to illuminate the impact of something, and what we found was that it worked better as a moment of revelation as opposed to reiteration. So we had originally, Kim saying, here's this thing that can happen, be careful, and then seeing it, and then seeing it again, and when seeing Kim again and saying, did you see what I was just talking about? And it felt a little bit almost redundant. And we're like, man, it seems like that should work right now, but it's not. And what we ended up doing was switching out that initial piece where I believe Kim just said, a lot of stuff can go wrong. And then we saw the thing go wrong, and then had the moment of summary, and we're like, oh, and now it feels like a discovery as opposed to kind of being beaten over the head with something. And those little moments, I think, for me are really they're really fulfilling and exciting. Kind of a weird place to take that, but
it's so
perfect.
true. I think the order in which you say things really matters, and it's not always clear what the right order is until you've got the pieces done, and then it becomes more clear.
Yeah, and I think and also with a different relationship, if Ezra and I hadn't had the relationship that we had, that tinkering and that experimentation could have been really tricky because there's ego involved potentially. One person might really feel strongly that it's done the other way, but when you have two people that are open to experimentation and no ego around whose idea is better or whatever, then you can ultimately get to a really great result. So yeah,
there's also a thing in there, Davis, about like the way that we talked about that, because like just offering some praise, like in the way that you when we were going back and forth through it, because a lot of this stuff also for everyone listening and everyone in the room, we're sending things back, we're not actually face to face, and it's sometimes Davis always made himself available if we needed to talk about it, like if it was 5 minutes in between things, like that was really great, but we didn't need it a lot of the time. But in like a note or explaining something, it was always like very, very clearly outlined what he was thinking, or like even if he was like, I don't know how to solve this, this is why this thing like isn't working, or this is why I need this thing to be differently, or it needs to be differently. It was very clear, like, so we weren't having to do a ton of back and forth. So yeah.
I think that for me, one of the things that was most fun about this project is at a certain point, I felt like we were putting ourselves in your hands, and we were in very good hands. And that to me is the thrill of collaboration, where you realize like I care deeply about this thing, but there are other people who have skills that I don't have who can help bring this idea to life. And that is really thrilling to be able to do. So thank you all for that. I felt like I just had to show up and be present, and that was a great relief.
Kim and I talked about that a bunch, just how much we trusted in our collaborators. And I think it's the kind of project that Radical Candor could never have gotten done on its own. It's very rare that people get an opportunity in their careers to collaborate on something that is literally impossible without collaboration.
Yes.
Oftentimes we're collaborating on things where we're like, I probably could have written that myself, or I could have made that myself, or I could have taken that photo. Like we imagine ourselves as being able to somehow have done it on our own, and we're comparing, it's the grass is greener problem, right? You have this fantasy where the grass is greener. And this was a completely different situation. And it reminded me of like the incredible value of human collaboration, because literally it was impossible. Like there's no way for us to have made it happen without collaboration. And I think on other episodes of the podcast, we've talked about the collaboration tax and how that can be so difficult. And I think it's sort of a beautiful thing when you actually get to experience collaboration that is essential to the work, without which it would not exist. As you were talking, Davis, I was like remembering that feeling of looking back and being like, wow, it just wouldn't have happened without it.
Yeah.
And that's a unique experience, and one that I've gotten to have a few times since I joined Radical Candor. So I feel very fortunate for it.
And I want to acknowledge that I had a major collaboration fail with this class, which is that I didn't bring Amy and Brandy. And so I thought I was Amy was working on a book and Brandy was really busy. And I thought I was, being nice. But I think it would have been better if we had brought them in earlier on the project. So I want to, especially since you're both on the call, I want to offer myself some self-criticism on that, because none of what we do could we do without the two of you.
Yeah, and it would have been great to have those voices in the room. There was such a great kind of a collaboration, like environment or atmosphere of the yes anding. I feel like there was so much of the yes anding happening in our Google Docs that were going back and forth, and they were just so much stronger for it.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Amy and Brandy, but I want to offer a moment if you want to say something to criticize me.
Well, I think just from this conversation, I feel sad that I missed out on all the fun and the creativity. I don't know if Ezra and Davis know, but I did go to film school after business school. So these kinds of projects are especially interesting and exciting to me. And having been very involved in some of our other digital content. So I would have loved to have been involved. And Kim, I think part of your desire for this was being protective of our time, which is coming from an intention around sort of honoring what you hear as each individual sort of team member's priorities. And I think also probably, and maybe this is overstepping or overstating, but to what Jason was saying about the collaboration tax, I think there is also some art and science to how many people are involved in a project and how additional voices, while they might be wonderful and helpful and fun, it does start to, expand potentially time, et cetera. So I think given your desire for efficiency and tight timelines and, the extent to which this was already a very big project, I totally understand it. And just hearing about this and getting to see, Ezra and Davis, I do feel like, oh, it would have been fun.
I think it absolutely would have. And Brandy, I just want to acknowledge like that. I do feel strongly that your voice is influenced, even if indirectly. Like I would often think of like what Amy or Brandy might think of or do about like a particular challenge you're having in the script, or like, is there a better way or more creative way to approach this? Or like, what would be a fun way to like, how could we bring levity to it? Like I was often influenced by thinking of our other collaborations. So I want to say that your voice was in my head, if not in the room.
I see that as a sign of success, Brandy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I would just say I feel like I was involved intermittently. I think I took the first call with Masterclass to discuss if we were going to do the collaboration. Yes. Then I was out of it for a while. And for me, I'm also just learning that I didn't know, Jason, that you were a disorganized person. I'm shocked. But I am a very disorganized person also. So it's more, I was also involved in editing some of the text and with the social media.
Yep.
But because I'm disorganized, I like to know what's happening. And that's just how I feel less anxious about things.
Yeah.
But it would be good. to learn some more organizational skills. So Ezra, I would love to know how you.
Yeah, I think we need a follow up on that. We were talking in the chat, like, so is everyone on the Radical Candor team really disorganized? And apparently the answer is yes.
Nora is not disorganized.
At least on this call. No, Nora is highly organized. Exactly.
I feel like Nora and Aaron are very organized. Aaron
Yes.
loves spreadsheets. So to me, that feels organized.
Very organized. I just want to add one other thing, which, in terms of radical candor and caring personally and knowing what different people, sort of what care personally looks like. I think for me, and I share this more if it's helpful for listeners, is that for me, asking my opinion, my perspective is a way of showing care. So even if I'm busy, if somebody says, hey, we would love to get your perspective or look at this, that for me is a sign of care. Whereas I think Kim,
not asking me is
like, you don't want, right. So I actually often will not include you in certain things because like that's sort of in my head. So in my mind, I think you are doing sort of your care personally for me. And then my care personally is like, I would actually like to be more involved. And so I just want to acknowledge, I think that's such a unique thing, and to know for different people, where that sign of like, oh, you did so well in this project, I'd love to get your perspective on this. And that is one of our go-to questions that we will often have folks ask, which is like, hey, here's what it's kind of like what Ezra and Davis were talking about. It's like, hey, here's what I'm trying to do with this scene. I'm trying to get it to be more revealing versus redundant. Like, what's one way you might have thought about it, right? And so folks often like getting that additional perspective as a way of showing care. And Kim, I think you have a different take on that often for yourself.
Yeah, but it's my job to treat you the way you want to be treated, not to treat you the way I want to be treated. I'm learning slowly. But
I appreciate being asked, and it just you walk the walk.
And sometimes fall down flat on my face, but that's okay.
I mean, that's part of walking. I think if tripping wasn't part of walking, it would be a lot easier for many people. I want to wrap the sort of core of the conversation. What have you taken away from our collaboration that's sort of stuck with you? Like, what's something that you carry with you into your new roles, on your new projects, or just into your life?
There's a couple things. It's interesting being freelance again, because I was freelance before I was in Masterclass, and in my experience, I was also, I came up kind of like as an office PA and a production coordinator, and producing smaller things. And in that world that I was in, there's very little feedback. If it is, it's obnoxious aggression. That's kind of the way I came up, right? That was like how I was raised, and in that world. And I definitely saw something I didn't appreciate. It didn't deter me to work on the thing because I love filmmaking. But I did have a lot of questions about why we were working this way, And then coming into Masterclass, which was my first experience working full-time for a company, where Davis talked about how there were feedback models inbuilt, and I felt almost like a sort of like a shelter dog. Like I felt so uncomfortable around the idea of feedback. I had to really, really work to be like, oh, okay, I can give feedback and it will be received and I won't die. Or I can receive feedback and I can incorporate it, and it's like so useful. Like that's actually the thing I was looking for. And so returning to the freelance world, and with those same feelings about wanting people to be able to go home and have dinner, I feel like a lot of this work has offered me even more ways to do that, and not just kind of rely on things like ruinous empathy and manipulative insincerity, because I was so horrified by this obnoxious aggression that I would often fall into those two quadrants. And so I feel like I have more options. It's funny that the quadrants, they all exist as the same size, because in my mind I'm like, oh, Radical Candor is much bigger. It's a much bigger space in my mind.
Right.
there's so many more ways to be helpful to people and to, facilitate a better experience and make it easier for people to do their best and to bring their best work. So yeah, thank you is what I really want to say.
So well said.
Yeah. And I think for me, it was, I think the importance of giving feedback is something that really cemented itself in my mind throughout the process of making this. And I think, our company they had written up the Radical Candor information and put it on a wiki for our company, being, talking about when you give feedback, do it this way. So it's something that I was exposed to, but I, admittedly wasn't necessarily living. And I think I was living a piece of it because I had a manager who was very smart and did a lot of mentorship. And one of the best things that they ever taught me was the importance of asking for feedback. And I think some of the most important things that I've learned about myself and my career and the way I do things, the best tools that I've gotten have come from those moments where I've said, I just wrapped something with somebody or whatever it might have been. And it said, we just finished this. Did you notice is there anything I could do better? And people have been like, you did this thing. And I was like, oh, I had no idea. And that's a thing that I carried with me. So I was living part of that. And it was really valuable for me. But I think the experience of creating this, again, really cemented the importance of giving feedback. Because it's almost just selfish if you're only asking for it and you're not giving it. And I think Ezra and I had a really wonderful relationship. And it was one where I felt as though I was a mentor and trying to help give them as much guidance as I could in things like directing, which was relatively new to them at the time. But the more that I was able to see them immediately act on the feedback that I was given, I was just like, oh, that's right. Yes, giving it too. Look at the improvement that we've seen just in this short amount of time. So that's, I think, would like to think that I walked away from it embracing both the components of giving and receiving.
Love it. Very well said. Such a pleasure working with both of you. And what a fun result. Like, I am proud every time I watch the course. I feel thrilled by it. So thank you.
Yeah, that's the highest praise we can get.
Yeah, it's nice to know that what we made is out there and people are getting access to it. It feels really great when you can just recommend something wholeheartedly that you've worked on. There's no wince.
Yeah. No, and I get notes all the time on LinkedIn. Oh, I saw your masterclass. It was really helpful. So thank you.
Yeah.
It's helping people walk the talk. Because it's easy to say, be radically candid, very hard to do it, and very hard to teach it. It's like, I think most people do not have a habit of radical candor. So building that habit is key.
And I think one thing for me too is one other takeaway that I've had is that I really applied it to my personal life as well as my professional life. So if that's one thing that I could advocate that people listening to this do, it's not just meant for the boardroom. It could be for the living room as well. And it's something that I've definitely employed with my wife, and it's been so helpful. Where you just say, can we pause just for a second, and then it doesn't snowball into something where there's resentment or whatever it might have been. So that's another thing that's been really helpful.
That is a perfect way to tie a little bow on this conversation, I think.
I totally agree. I can't express my happiness that we finally got to have this conversation and that people out there will learn a little bit more about the two of you and about the work that we did together. Like I said, I'm incredibly proud of it. And I'm hopeful that people who listen to this conversation will learn a little bit more about and appreciate a little bit more about the actual work that we did, but also just learn from the two of you, because I feel strongly that both of you sort of walked the talk while we worked together. And it sounds like it's continuing to have a positive impact on you. And for everybody out there listening and thinking, I have this problem in a relationship and it's outside of work, does radical candor apply? I think you can hear Davis's recommendation to give it a shot. See if it helps, because it really could. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. I'm so glad that
pleasure.
We did this. And I'm just really grateful to both of you for making the space for us to talk about this. It's we don't often get to, and so it's a real treat.
It was so much fun thinking about the experience again. Sometimes when you wrap something up, it's in the rear view and you don't think about it a lot, but this was wonderful to have the prompt to dive back into this and think about it. It was a pleasure.
If you haven't already, sign up for Radical Candor on Sessions by Masterclass at radicalcandor.com/masterclass. To see the show notes for this episode, head to radicalcandor.com/podcast. Praise in public and private, and criticize in private. And if you like what you hear, go ahead, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. If you've got criticism for us, email it to podcast@radicalcandor.com. And since we've got some experts here, Davis, Ezra, anything more that we should add or take away from our sign-off at the end of this podcast? What would you edit? What would you add? What would you delete?
The ones where people, you can do where can I find you? Or what do you have coming up? I always like those, because then you're like, oh, I can look this person up, or yeah.
Oh, cool. So is that a question we want to ask you? Yeah. Where can we find you? What's going on? Tell us everything.
Well, you can. I love that I just orchestrated that for myself.
Yeah,
I didn't do that. I
great.
Absolutely didn't do that. I can be found mostly through my Instagram, actually, which is at POSLE, pronounced Posel, and or my website.
Can you say that again? Pronounced
Posel. It was a nickname when I was a kid. And then my website, which is ezrarose.me. And I'm working on a documentary, so that's fun and cool, and I'm excited.
Very cool. So if you're making a documentary, hire Ezra. I will say it.
That way Ezra doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Davis, how can folks keep in touch with you?
So that'd be great. My LinkedIn's probably the best one, and you can just look me up, Davis Carter. I think I'm probably the only one.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now. The Radical Candor podcast is based on the book Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Episodes are written and produced by Brandy Neal, with script editing by me, Amy Sandler. The show features Radical Candor co-founders Kim Scott and Jason Rosoff and is hosted by me, still Amy Sandler. Nick Carissimi is our audio engineer. The Radical Candor podcast theme music was composed by Cliff Goldmacher. Follow us on LinkedIn, Radical Candor the Company, and visit us at radicalcandor.com.